Hi, this is Justin Coletti. You may know me from SonicScoop, but today I'm on the Pro Audiophiles channel, and I'm super excited to be here. We've been working with the Pro Audiophiles for a long time, and I wanted to share with you a condensed version of some of the most popular tips from some of the most popular podcast episodes we've done in the past few months over on the SonicScoop podcast. This one is going to be super concise as I can make it, and hopefully you'll get a whole bunch of killer insights in this one all at once. This is going to be on a theme that I was really hammering on the podcast for a little while in the past few months, and that is some of the biggest mistakes you can make in the mix, and more importantly, how to correct them, what you can do about them. These are common errors that all of us make, especially at the beginning, and some of them, if you're anything like me, made them for far too long, even when they were getting good. These are the kind of things, when you stop doing them, you will get so much better at mixing and so much more satisfied with your results. I've just seen this again and again in my mastering clients, in students of my courses, in my coaching call clients, that when they finally correct these bad habits, they start being much more happy with the results. And just as importantly, enjoying the process more so that they can do it more often and be excited to get into the chair in the studio. So let's get right into this. I want to start almost like in a linear way with one of the earliest, biggest mistakes in the process of mixing. And that is not getting the technical stuff out of the way first. Super duper essential. So many of the best mixers, I see it again and again when we do our MixCon master classes, things like that, when I interview great producers and engineers, have them give us mix walkthroughs, that kind of stuff. So many of them, again and again, come up with this idea of either A, having a template, or B, if they're working in the analog domain, kind of getting all their routing and all their stuff plugged up first before they start messing around with knobs and faders. Because you really want to minimize, when you're mixing, the back and forth of, okay, I'm making mix decisions. No, wait, I'm making technical choices. Wait, I'm making mix decisions and being creative. No, I have to deal with this technical thing and the busing and the routing and where does it go and how do you, and then where do I find the plugin? The less mental switching you can do, the more creative you can stay throughout the entire process, and the easier all the other stuff we're going to talk about gets. The less burnout you're going to face. It's a big deal getting a template together or a system, a flow for mixing together. So that is big idea number one. Man, I could do a whole long episode just about this, but I want to just flag this as one of the biggest mistakes that people make early on, that I made early on, that so many of my clients and students made early on, and that they really are excited when they stop making this mistake of not getting the technical stuff out of the way first. I want to move on to another one, balances, setting levels. Should be pretty much the next thing that happens, but it's not for everybody. Some people wait too long to really focus on levels and balances. So big mixing mistake number 2 is saving balances for too late into the process. You should be focusing on like just levels and pans really early on in your mix, instead of getting distracted by the idea of let's compress, let's EQ, let's play around with a lot of different reverbs and delays, let's apply the limiter, let's do the parallel processing. All that stuff is good. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but just hold on. How does the overall mix sound, right? The mixing part of mixing, the balances. And a lot of people get distracted by the shiny new plugin, the shiny new tool that's supposed to fix everything, that they don't spend enough time on that incredibly important part early on of just getting your levels and balances right. Because if you do that, you end up finding you need less EQ, less dynamic range control, less compression. It's big. Don't save it for later. Make sure you spend dedicated time towards the beginning of the mix just focusing on levels and panning. All right, keeping on with this idea of balances, number 3 big mistake a lot of people make is they start mixing at the beginning of the song. Seems like a natural place to start mixing at the beginning of the song, right? Well, natural, maybe, but is natural always good? There's a lot of things that occur in nature that I don't want happening to me, okay? And this is one of those things. I don't want to start at the beginning of the song, because what's happening in the beginning of most songs, right? You got like a sparse intro. There's an acoustic guitar playing or some, keyboard pad or whatever it is, and then a little bit the vocal comes in. But the main action, like the hard part of your mix, is when that chorus drops, right? Or when that bridge hits, or whatever it is, where things get dense and there's, instead of like 2 or 3 pieces to fit together, there's 20 or 30 pieces to fit together. My goodness, that's a much more complicated puzzle. If you spend all this time at the beginning of your song trying to get everything to sit right, making everything sound appropriately big, by the time you get to the dense section, there's no room for anything. What if you switch this and started really focusing the early part of your mix, where you're really kind of getting everything overall together? What if you went in to the most essential and important parts of the song and worked on those? Maybe it's the second chorus, and you start mixing there. Sometimes for the right type of material, you might do like part of a verse into part of a chorus, because that transition and that, switch from this to that, that's one of the most important things. We can go into more detail about when it's better to take the one approach versus the other, but that idea of not starting your mixes and the most important parts of level setting balance at the beginning, but starting in a really dense section and starting with your most important elements in that dense section, when you start doing that, you're going to start having much better results. So I hope that's another useful one for you. Okay. Now we'll get into the fun stuff that everyone wants to talk about, the EQ, the compression, the limiting, and I'll give you 1 or 2 on each of these real quick. We'll try to keep it rapid fire. I can go to so much more detail on each of these and give you ideas within the ideas, but I want to keep this one tight, so let's try. All right. EQ. Big mistake is just EQing because you think you're supposed to. Processing in general, just because you think you're supposed to. One of the worst things I think you can do in any mix is you start in your kick drum in solo, you start EQing it, you go to your snare drum, you start EQing it in solo, on and on through your drums, and you get to your bass, you start EQing that in solo, and then you go on to your keyboard, you start EQing that in solo, and then you put it all together. You got down to the vocal, you EQ that in solo, and you put it all together. And you EQ'd everything just because you figured you're supposed to EQ things. That's part of mixing. So you put an EQ on everything and saw if you could make them sound better in solo, and then you put it all together and it's just a soup. You didn't actually make anything fit better together. So that's one big problem with EQing, is going in and EQing because you think you're supposed to and doing it in solo. You've probably heard this one by now, the whole don't mix in solo too much thing. And it's one of those pieces of advice that's so easy and so simple that it's really hard to do. But once you start making sure that you make the solo button your enemy and you only do on rare occasion and you think before you hit it, should I really be doing this? You're going to get much bigger improvements. Other 2 big things I'll say about EQ real quick is EQing what you can't hear. That's another potential problem right there. And focusing too much on sweeping EQs. Sweeping your EQs is a great way to learn the overall frequency spectrum, but it's not a great way to spend most of your time mixing. You could end up just identifying problems in your room and cutting those out. That's not helping you. There are alternative approaches to sweeping. I'm not saying never sweep, but if that's what you do every single time with a huge boost every single time you want to EQ, probably not the best strategy. There are better strategies, and I have an entire episode kind of going into that, but we don't want to do all the details. We want big concepts, easy wins for you. So let's keep on going. The next one is compression, and same idea. Compressing without purpose. Compressing just because you think you're supposed to. One of the biggest things to acknowledge is that whenever you do compress a sound, you're going to have some effect on the shape and the envelope of that sound. Your compressor will either have an attack fast enough that it's going to smooth out some of the attack and make the sound a little bit more controlled but a little bit more dull. Or your attack is going to be slow enough that the initial transient is going to get through and the sound will actually start to get a little bit brighter and a little bit more kind of articulate and at the expense potentially of being a little bit less controlled. Similar thing happens with release. You can have release settings that are slow enough that things kind of start to sound mushy, and you can have release settings that are so fast that they bring out some additional edge and excitement and grit, and too much, and you start to bring out distortion and trash. So a big mistake is compressing just because you think you're supposed to, instead of compressing with an end result in mind that you're trying to achieve, and compressing without any thought to, well, since I'm going to be reshaping the attack, do I want to think about removing attack or adding attack? Because no matter what, I'm going to end up doing one of those two things. So which one of those two am I okay with? And that's a great way to think about the attack and release settings on your compressors. Couple more ideas here. Here's a big one for you, reverb. This is one of the other big mistakes that I find in a lot of mixes early on, and what keeps people's mixes from sounding like their favorite records. And that is using too much reverb, usually because they're doing one of two things wrong. One, they're not EQing the reverb send or returns, or two, they're not using pre-delay. And this leads to people having over-apparent reverbs compared to their favorite records. So rather than just create a washy soup of reverb, if you want to create a reverb that has an emotional impact that adds intrigue and excitement and interest to your mix without all the washiness, EQing your reverb send or return is big, because if you really listen critically to a lot of your favorite records, you'll find that they rarely use totally full bandwidth reverbs. Usually one of three things is going on. Either A, you've got a reverb with a whole bunch of high frequency chopped off. It's a dark reverb. B, you've got a reverb with a bunch of low frequency chopped off, and it's a fairly bright, splashy reverb. Or more commonly than B is C. You've got one with some low frequency taken off and some high frequency taken off. It's a fairly mid-rangey reverb. Most reverbs you're going to hear on your favorite records are somewhat band limited in that respect. They're not totally full bandwidth. And this actually allows you to potentially increase the volume of the reverb without it dominating the mix too much and without it taking up too much space in the mix. So you can have a reverb that has a bit more of a signature sound without it overpowering everything. But another thing that you can do to make the reverb a little bit more audible without making it overly apparent is to add a pre-delay. A pre-delay just means when your sound hits, instead of your reverb hitting at the same time, your sound hits, and then there's a slight delay, and then your reverb hits. I could go into extreme detail, and I do in other episodes, about exactly how to time your pre-delay and all that stuff. But right now, I want you to get that concept in your head, that if there's a slight separation between when your sound hits and when the reverb hits around it, the reverb will become slightly more audible in a good way, in the sense that you don't have to jack the volume up so high to hear it. So now you don't have to clutter up the mix quite so much. You don't have to have this huge wash constantly in your mix. You can just have the sound, slight pause that you're not even really aware of unless you're listening critically, and then the reverb. So you can tuck it at a relatively lower level while still being more apparent. And if you mix those two things together, a little bit of a pre-delay with an EQ'd send or return, you're getting closer to the approach that's probably applied to reverb in most of your favorite records and most of your favorite mixes. And this is one of the things that way too many people leave off. Man, there are so many more mixing mistakes that I could go into, and I could go into them in so much more detail. But rather than take up too much of your time today, I want to leave you with one more. And this is a big thing that separates the pros, the people who are doing it really well, from average mixers who wish their mixes had the same kind of pull and emotional impact. And that is not leaving off the final and possibly most important step of mixing for enhancing the emotional impact of the song. And that is automation. Your level rides, your fader rides. It's one thing to start your mix early on and get the balances sounding right so they just sound good overall. Get the EQ and compression sounding right so it just sounds good overall. But what's going to make a mix feel more like a living, breathing performance that's going to allow you to highlight new and different sounds at different times to make people feel like they heard everything in the mix and there's always new surprises for them, is to really listen to the mix the whole way through and try an automation pass on all of the most important elements in there. Your vocals, centrally. Some of the kind of lead flourishes. Maybe trying occasional reverb rides or delay rides or little delay throws that happen only occasionally. Getting the building blocks of the mix together. This last little bit of ornamentation, this last 10 or 20% of the final sound comes from following the song like an end listener. And this is a step that's so easy for us to forget when we're mixing because we get so zoomed in. We're working on the chorus and we're zoomed in on the chorus. We're working on the verse, we're zoomed in on the verse. We're working on the guitar, we're zoomed in on the guitar. We're working on the vocal, we're zoomed in on the vocal, etc., etc. You've got to take that moment to step back and listen to the song the whole way through. Take notes on what you think should change. Do I really need to bring this bass up or down, or is it just when the chorus drops that the bass should come down? Or is it just for that first hit of the chorus that the bass should come up to give a little bit more of a when that chorus hits? That's the technical term, when the chorus hits. But then it can go back to its previous level after that first hit of the chorus. These are the kinds of things to think about. Hey, there's this guitar doing this fairly intricate part, but I don't want it going so loud the whole time during the chorus because it distracts from other more important elements. But what if it came up just kind of in the middle of bar 3, so we kind of get pulled in that direction, and then it kind of doesn't disappear, but kind of goes back down to its usual level. These kinds of things, where we're directing the listener's attention different places at different times. It's especially important on vocals to give the feeling of a consistent vocal level is probably not going to come from one vocal level that sits for the entire song. At very least, you'll probably need one vocal level for your verse, one for your bridge, one for your chorus. But as you get more advanced, you start to realize that actually for this word and this phrase, we need to duck it down or bring it up. And this is a big mistake to leave this stuff off. And I think that's one of the many things that separates absolutely great mixes and mixers from the rest of us who are trying to get there. Well, I hope some of these ideas have been useful to you. If you want more stuff like this, more of these big picture concepts that are going to dramatically improve your approach in the studio, I hope you'll join me for more here on the Pro Audiophiles channel, as well as over at SonicScoop.com. If you want to go even deeper with me, I've got a couple of totally free workshops for you. A great one, if you've enjoyed some of these big wins from this episode that you can implement into your work right away, is the 5 habits of every great mixer. And you can find that over at sonicscoop.com/mixhabits. That's sonicscoop.com/mixhabits for the free workshop, the 5 habits of every great mixer. And this is pulled from the common threads that really bring the work of all the amazing mixers I've studied together. I've been spending more than the past decade interviewing and investigating the work of and evaluating and looking in the sessions of and sometimes even working alongside some of the best mixers on the planet. And the 5 habits of every great mixer is really called from that experience and ties together all the things that they have in common with each other. And a lot of the ideas in the workshop we have not discussed in this quick video for you. I've also got a good one on mastering. If you want to go even deeper on mastering and get kind of a primer on the basics of mastering, you can check out Mastering 101 at sonicscoop.com/mastering101. That's sonicscoop.com/mastering101. If you want to know more about what mastering is all about, how to do it, get some of the core takeaways to get you running in the direction of mastering for yourself, or just knowing how to work with a mastering engineer and knowing what to expect out of the process, you can check that out, sonicscoop.com/mastering101. Of course, I've got full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, which we've just released a totally new update of. You can find that at mixingbreakthroughs.com. It's got over 8 hours, big conceptual stuff like what we just did here today, but also the nitty-gritty of getting into the mix together and giving you guys sessions that you can work on yourselves. And there's also the full-length course, Mastering Demystified. It's been a blast hanging out with you here on the Pro Audiophiles channel. Definitely hit like and subscribe. Make sure you hit the notifications bell so you get more videos on the Pro Audiophiles channel as they come out. If you want more stuff like this, also check out the SonicScoop podcast. Check us out at sonicscoop.com or right here on YouTube at youtube.com/SonicScoopVideo. That is youtube.com/SonicScoopVideo. It's been great hanging out with you. This has been Justin Coletti of SonicScoop and the Pro Audiophiles. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.